Good evening, everybody. It's Diane Sayre here, and this is the New York Symposium for June 2nd. And while we have talked a great deal about the danger of nuclear war and the financial collapse driving it, one thing we haven't talked about in a while is what's happening with the food supply, the attack on farmers, and and the how the environmentalist movement intersects the situation with agriculture, banking, and everything else. Now, what I'm going to do this evening is just I'd like to introduce my two guests, and as always, participation in the Sayre for Senate Symposium does not constitute endorsement of any particular political candidacy, but we are doing this for the purpose of educating the voters and having a dialogue. All of us don't necessarily agree on everything, but in this day and age, it's very rare for people to be allowed to express disagreements or take up topics which urgently need to be discussed, like what is happening with the physical economy, as Lyndon LaRouche warned about so many times. So I have two guests this evening. Maybe, Jose, you could just show everybody for a minute. I'm joined by Bob Baker of Executive Intelligence Review, a farm leader from Family Farm in Iowa, and by Mike Calicrate, who is a livestock producer, owner of Ranch Foods Direct, and I guess the cattle are in Kansas and the processing is in Colorado Springs. And what we are going to do is talk about the situation both in the United States and also in the Netherlands. I had the opportunity to interview one of the leaders of the farm movement in the Netherlands this afternoon. We're going to watch a little bit of that. But first, I'm going to go to Bob, who was able to actually join them in one of their rallies and speak there. And he may say something about it and show a little clip of that. Bob, you're muted.
I'm really glad to participate in this discussion. And Mike and I have had many discussions about the ag crisis. And in the recent weeks, I had the opportunity to visit with a lot of farmers in Europe and what they're up against. And I was very impressed with the grit that the farmers, chunks of them, have in protesting this policy that's shutting down both farms and food production. And on March 11th, there was a big rally called for by the Farmers Defense Force of the Netherlands. Now, it's a very kind of a recent grouping that came together since 2019, but they are exceptionally organized and have really got good grit. And so they've been bringing their tractors out by the thousands throughout the Netherlands and have inspired farmers all across Europe. So at this rally on the 11th, they invited 5,000 tractors and 100,000 people they expected to show up. And 4 days before the event, the government announced if they had more than 2 tractors, they would call out the police or the military. And so the farmers were already coming to the rally. They had tractor cages as big as 100 and coming from all over. And all of a sudden, the police were stopping them all over the Netherlands. And they were calling in to the leader of the Farmers Defense Force, Mark. And he said, well, just have a rally there. So we have a big showing. So they invited me to address their conference, and that's what we're going to play, is about a minute of that.
Bob, now it's your turn.
Okay. Okay, hello. Greetings from the farmers and ranchers
Do we get the
in
sound?
the United States. I am Bob Baker.
Bob, now it's your turn.
Okay. Okay, hello. Greetings from the farmers and ranchers in the United States. I am
Bob, now it's your turn.
okay. Okay, hello. Greetings from the farmers and ranchers in the United States. I am Bob Baker from a family farm in Iowa. I salute you. I consider this the highest honor humanity could have, to have this kind of a group step forward and fight for food and food producers. I bring special support from cattlemen in the American West, from the RCAF organization in Montana and other states, from the Kansas Cattlemen's Association, the National Dairy Producers Association, members of the National Farmers Union, and from the Schiller Institute internationally. Let this be the beginning for us to join forces to defeat
So
Go ahead.
anyway, so that went on for a little while, but you get the idea. But they had speaker after speaker after speaker, farmers get up and just gave very powerful speeches, and I was totally impressed. So anyway, I just wanted to show that. We can discuss that. And Saita, who you'll see here shortly, she is one of the top leaders. She was on the stage coordinating speakers, and she's been in this excellent battle.
Great, thanks. So we'll go to that interview with her from earlier today. So why don't we start? So I would like to welcome Sita van Kuijpema to the symposium. She is a farm leader from the Netherlands, and I know Americans have been following what's happening there, but may not have an idea of the details and also some of the important victories. And so I'm just going to ask you to go ahead. Please tell us who you are, what organizations you are with, and what's the situation.
Yeah, my name is Sita van Kuijpema. I have been a dairy farmer for a very long time, until 3 years ago. Today, I am still the president and board member of Dutch Dairymen Board. So that's a group, an organization of dairy farmers, but most important, that's the group who also organized all the demonstrations, is Farmers Defence Force. But it was founded in 2019. And so since 2019, I'm involved in Farmers Defence Force, and I'm secretary of the board.
How did Farmers Defence Force get started? Why did farmers need to defend themselves?
In May 2019, there were animal extremists, who came into a pig farm and stayed there for until 20 hours without being removed by the government, without being removed by the police. This shocked Mark van den Oever, the founder of Farmers Defence Force, this much that he started a Facebook page. This Facebook page became, in a few weeks' time, an enormous success. A lot of people became a member. After that, we had a politician who said, that was, I think, in August 2019, who said half of the farmers, half of the cattle had to go to become more sustainable. And then Farmers Defence Force became the organization it is today. We organized together with another group the 1st of October 2019, and that was also the demonstration that I came to Farmers Defence Force. And since then, we have been actually fighting the government.
Now, I don't suppose we really have a lot of excess food. You would think so, by these crazy politicians who keep trying to cut production, but actually there are millions of people on the planet who are starving. So Are any of the consumers of this food aware that their supply is about to disappear?
Well, that's the egoistic effect of what these people who act like they are high priests of a new kind of sect, telling that nature is something that they create. Since COVID, we have about 30% more hungry people in the world, the United Nations have said. Since the Ukraine-Russia war, there are a lot of people in Africa who can't get any grain anymore to bake their bread. So we all see that it is a very vulnerable system, but also that getting dependent on other regions of the world is very dangerous because you could get left out. And although we export a lot in the Netherlands, we import more than half of what we consume. A Dutch person needs about the Dutch inhabitants, we are 18 million now, need 3.4 million hectares of land, but we only have 1.8. So the rest of what we consume, we import. And all the excess milk and meat and vegetables, we do export, but more than half of what we consume comes from abroad.
So can you tell me about what is the excuse for shutting down these farms? What are they saying? What are the problems, the alleged pollution and damage? What are they talking about?
They say that farmers pollute nature, actually. Some years ago in 1990, Nature 2000 area were founded. Nature 2000 areas are nature conservation areas where specific species should live. And now they are telling that the areas are very suitable for this and this plant, but if those plants aren't there, it's the fault of the farmers and their emission from their cows are the fault that's why those plants aren't there. But if I tell you that nature organizations are looking at the year 1900 or 1700 to get back to the state of nature that the Dutch nature was in, and nobody really knows, you know how ridiculous this system is and how evil this system is.
Right, and they're making a big deal about nitrogen. Can you say something about this?
Yeah. I was in the European Parliament this week even. It's CO2, and in France it's methane. But it all has the same outcome, the demands to the farmers in Europe, that at least half of them should go. So you see that it doesn't have to do a lot with nitrogen because the surroundings are nitrogen. It's even in our DNA. So it all has to do with taking away the land. They just want us to move, and they are making legislation so that we have no other choice.
Right. I read a speech by someone there, I think, or maybe a translation where he said, how can you say the cows are the problem because we had more cows now than we had in 1900, but you used to have bison, you used to have other animals in the millions who I presume would emit the same gases.
Yeah, well, actually, the Netherlands were, of course, first was a swamp. And then because of the farmers and the building of dikes, the Netherlands became a dry country. We do have lakes, of course, but now we have dry feet. And it all has to do with agriculture. So what is really nature and unspoiled in the Netherlands? Actually, it doesn't exist. It's all man-made. And so it's a very peculiar discussion, and very often you feel like you're not on the same planet because those people and what they say has nothing to do with science, and it has nothing to do with reality. So they have an ideology, and politics very often is ideology, but it can also become very dangerous. And we have seen in the past what ideology can do for regions. And I think that the ideology today is that all the food and food production should be in the hands of the state. So a few people control food, and then you can control all your people.
Right. Well, I think most of the people would be dead, actually. And
Yes. Yeah,
I
that's
mean,
the
if you don't
effect.
have food, what's the conclusion? You're not going to
Yeah.
be there. I think this is terrible. Now, there's been quite a revolt. So tell me about that. What's happening and what has happened in recent elections and the response and so on.
Yeah. There was a lot of framing of farmers already before 2019, just blaming actually the farmers of everything there is. So we are the fault of everything. So what farmers also thought was that the Dutch people would also think bad of them. And then with the demonstration of the 1st of October 2019, when thousands of farmers came to The Hague, where our parliament is, to protest, we saw that most of the Dutch people were standing alongside the roads, and they were applauding and they were waving and they were so enthusiastic. So then we knew that our Dutch civilians, the Dutch people, they do know the worth of the farmers. And since then, we have never lost the sympathy of the civilians. But what we are facing is a government and politicians who keep framing the farmers for doing everything wrong. But in the election, you saw that a lot of people thought it were provincial elections, and they have all voted for a new party that also started officially on the 1st of October 2019, and that is what we call the Boer-Burger-beweging. Its translation, it is the farmer civilian movement. And they went from 1 seat in the parliament to 16 seats today in the Senate. And in the provinces, everywhere they are the largest party. But what our government this week has done is scheming, like they always do, with parties outside of the coalition. There were 2 seats that were not given yet for the Senate. And if our government got those seats, they would have, again, enough position to go along with all the harassment they are putting on the Dutch people. And they managed now to have those 2 seats that actually had to go to the farmers' civilian movement because they came up like a rocket, but they have managed to move those 2 seats to the coalition. And now a lot of people are furious. So I think that if we keep that fire going, because they really want to get rid of the farmers. It's really not a joke anymore. They are making new legislation today. We have seen some parts of it. They call it the regional legislation. It's the biggest thing since we have our constitution. And then you can just be your land can be taken away from you, and that's it's horrible.
So what do you think that you would like Americans to know? And what can we do to build this internationally? Are you getting a lot of international support? It seems farmers are marching in India and France and different places.
Yeah. We even had on in March, or was it even a little bit later? Yes, we had American and Canadian people coming over to present us with a flag. It was signed by a lot of Americans and Canadians, people with a lot of statue also, and also to give us support. And for us, that was very meaningful. Also in Europe, we see that a lot of people support the Dutch farmers and also know that they have to do something. And I think in the US, you should be very aware, because here in the newspapers, we heard what, or actually not in the newspapers, more in internet papers, that Mr. Kerry, John Kerry said that because farms emit 33% of the emissions, that they should also be cut down to get to net zero. I don't know if he said so, But if he did, I think that the American people should be very aware also, because you're going down the same road that we are going down today. And Mr. John Kerry has forgotten that we do not only emit CO2 and carbon and phosphates and nitrates, but we are the only sector that really captures CO2, nitrogen, phosphates, carbon in our crops, in our grass, and in our soil. And we are the only sector who does so. And I hear these politicians all boast about the good work of forests, but the forest is large grass. They have exactly the same function. They capture, and as soon as you burn the trees, for what reason, or build furniture, all what is captured is going into the air again. So that's the cycle of life. And what we are doing as food producers is the cycle of life.
Well, if they were honest, if this really were a concern, then they would want to have more farmers. But
Yes.
that's where you see they are not honest. I
No,
mean,
they are not honest. Yeah. Yeah.
it's like the Nord Stream pipeline. We hear
Yeah.
all about the environment, but here was the biggest emission of methane ever,
Yeah.
with a lot of evidence pointing towards certain American and British and other leaders,
Yeah.
but no investigation.
Yeah. Well, and of course you have a professor that we even invited for a few years back to the Netherlands, Dr. Frank Mietloner, who is a real specialist on methane and who has explains also to the people from the IPCC that the cycle of methane from cows is back into the life cycle of CO2 again in 12 years. So there's actually nothing to worry about. It is the methane from swamps, etc., that is much more a problem. And the biggest emitters of methane are man-made sources in the ground. So open sources that man-made, but it were not farmers.
Right. Now, we mentioned just before we started about the windmills and solar panels, which here in New York, for example, and across the United States, farmers are being forced in a way, coerced through financial agreements to put these things on their property rather than growing food. Is it something like that there? What's happening there?
Yeah, our whole North Sea is full of windmills now, and it's really, our fishermen have been just put down. I can't say it anywhere else. We have villages where a lot of people, also tourism comes because they are the fishermen's places. Well, there is one boat yet who fishes and the rest has already stopped. So that's very sad in a few years' time. Yeah, yeah.
That's unbelievable. I had a guest last year who is the head of the Long Island Fishermen's Association, and they are in a huge battle against the windmills off the coast of Long Island because they will destroy the fishing. Not to mention that in the hot weather, when you think you want the electricity from the windmills, there is no wind. So it's really crazy. And since they're so unreliable, you have to build a gas-fired power plant with equal capacity as what you're supposed to get from the wind, because it doesn't work. So it doesn't save you anything. It just destroys, really. Yeah.
Yes, that's happening here too. Yes.
One other question about the political situation. What is the mood of the population regarding the war in Ukraine?
Well, the war already is 1.5 years now about. And of course, it's still in the news and people are still worried about it. But the panic from the first weeks has actually gone. Yeah, but there are a lot of people here from the Ukraine who live in the Netherlands, who live in Germany, who live in Poland. Poland, of course, has a lot of Ukraine people. And that's a fact. So we also have a lot of immigrants coming in, migrants. And that's creating troubles. Yeah, housing is a big problem in the Netherlands. Young people can get a house. And it all has to do with that nitrogen crisis that government made up. And so it's a real political made.
Wait, So wait, the young people can't get houses because of the nitrogen crisis? How does
Yeah.
that work?
Yeah, because of the nitrogen, they have put a ceiling, a nitrogen ceiling for the Netherlands. Years ago, our politicians said, okay, we are not going to go above this ceiling. And then all farmers needed permits. So all this nitrogen got into this permit. All the other firms also needed a permit, but nobody did something. So they are all without a permit. And now the people with the permit have to go to give way to people who do not have a permit. The logical thing would do, intelligent people would do, just go to Brussels and say, what we have done years ago is stupid and we need to do it in another way. So this nitrogen ceiling has to go. We have to look at the state of nature. That's also what is in the directive. The state of nature has to be protected. Well, we added a lot of nature, we added a lot of species, but we also have nitrogen. And so as long as our government keeps holding on to this stupid paper reality, we cannot build houses. We cannot expand certain firms. Actually, we cannot build roads because, of course, then you also get more nitrogen. So we have a very crazy situation, and we have there is an organization, how do you call it? It's a self-called nature organization who goes to court and wins his cases against firms who want to expand, because it says, judge, look at the law. You cannot expand more nitrogen, so you have to take away the right to build houses, etc. And he wins because we have a stupid law. And the judge looks at the law and not at what's logical. So that's the stupid situation. If you would make a series of it, a show, everybody would say, well, you can laugh about it, but it's not realistic. But we are living today in a soap.
Right, right,
Yeah.
exactly. Well, thank you very much. And I would like to, is there a way that people can contact your association if there are people who hear this who want to have farmers come or speak by Zoom to their meetings?
Yes, if they are sending an email to info@farmersdefenseforce.nl, and I know that we are writing defense differently than you, so probably we made a small mistake. We are writing it with a C in defense and not with an S. So I often see people writing defense with an S, but we are writing it with a C. So if they would email, they should look at that. And if you look
so
at
just say it again, info@farmersdefenseforce.nl.
yeah.
And defense is spelled with a C, D-E-F-E-C-E.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Great.
I have it on my blouse, but I think that's not very, no, you can't see it.
Hard to see it.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And they can, of course, we have a Facebook site they can be a member of on. So if they just want to look at what we are doing, but that's all in Dutch, of course. So it will be hard for them to understand. Yeah.
Okay, well, thanks. Thank you for telling us what our own John Kerry is telling people. It's
well,
not
it was, it was spread here, and I have asked a few people in the US if he really said it or that it was fake news. But most people said that it was true, and that he said that 33% of the emissions came from farms, and to get to net zero, we had to get rid of those farmers. And then I thought to myself, it's like I hear Brussels talk and I hear The Hague talk, but you need food. No farmers, no food. And like a German farmer last week said, when die Bauer stirbt, now it was like if there is no farmer, no food, it was actually the same. And it's very emotional for a lot of people today. That's also for the farmers. There are a lot of emotions and there is a lot of distress. So this government has to stop its evil ways. We need fair policy and we need food for the future.
Yes, I think there's nothing more evil than preventing people from doing the good. That is one of the most evil things. It destroys your soul if you are not able to use your talent for the good of mankind.
Yeah. Well, we even get banned if you want to get buyout, because the Dutch government is going to buy out farms. If you are going to do that voluntarily, you get a professional ban, not only for the Netherlands, but for the whole of the EU. That's how evil they are getting, because in the European Constitution, it is said that you have the free right of profession. And even that is not respected anymore. So it's really going the wrong way in the Netherlands, but also in Europe.
Right.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you very much. I hope we can talk again under happier circumstances when we have changed our governments.
Yeah, I hope so too. And have a lot of success getting elected. Okay.
Thank you.
Yes.
Okay. Here we go.
Bye.
Great. So that was the interview. So now if we can have Bob and Mike, maybe you go ahead, or both of you, on thoughts that you have about what she had to say and the situation facing American farmers. I think it's a crisis, but perhaps there are nuanced differences and certain things that are similar.
Yeah, Diane, what I see in that is just a reminder that, farmers are pretty darn difficult to deal with. They make really good citizens. They understand what work is. They understand how to build communities. They understand how things work. And they are willing to fight, which makes it really difficult to try to enslave them. We've got a situation right now with Tyson, for example. They've been able to enslave the chicken growers that supply their chickens. And in 2001, they bought IBP, the big beef company, the biggest beef packer in America. And what they've learned since then, I think, is really starting to get to them, that these ranchers are a tough bunch to deal with. People who raise cattle don't enslave easily. They don't become servants easily. They are willing to fight. And I think Tyson's really getting tired that they haven't been able to totally convert the beef industry into the chicken model. And if you go back and you look at the days of Earl Butz, and the Council on Economic Development, in the United States, there was a concerted effort among the biggest businesses in the country, the wealthiest people in the country, to move farmers from the land, to get them off of those farms and into the city to what they called more productive work, which basically they'd be going to work in manufacturing as we were, coming into this industrial explosion that we had. And they made great workers. But the deal is you have to make them willing sellers. You got to make them want to leave the land. And boy, did they ever do that. And Earl Butz and his programs of Get Big or Get Out accomplishes some things that they were interested in. And that is, number one, having a whole lot fewer citizen farmers out there fighting for democracy and fairness and justice, but being able to control the food supply. And as a result, we took the stewards off the land. So our stewardship is gone. And when you look at the land, the resources like water, the Ogallala Aquifer, they're mining it today. Without farmers, you can't have a clean environment. You can't have a healthy environment. And they talk about nitrogen in the Netherlands. Well, my goodness, if farmers are allowed to make money, if farmers are allowed to do their jobs, you've got healthier soils, which are serious carbon sinks, which you look at the White Oak Pastures data from Will Harris's place. I mean, And I would say my operation in St. Francis, Kansas, we are carbon negative. I mean, we are sequestering more carbon than we're emitting, and yet we cannot replicate our models because the people in Washington that work for the big concentrated power and money aren't going to let us. They aren't going to support us. They're gonna promote the interests of the biggest companies, like, you know, the retail and big meat packer cartel. And I just see the Netherlands as just another example, having failed to get rid of farmers one way through low prices and other means. Why not just make it illegal to farm? You know, that's where it looks to me like they've gone. And then it becomes just a political battle of trying to get enough farmers, enough citizens that care about where their food comes from and whether or not they're even going to be able to eat, getting those in positions of power in our government. It's going to be really tough. But this is just so in your face, abusive to people in general. You know, United States, we are a net food importer. We cannot feed ourselves. And so the companies like the Cargills, the ADMs, the Bunge's, the Tyson's, the JBS's, they love it because they get to transact nearly all the food that we eat. They don't produce it, but they can search the world for those that will produce it the cheapest and make a lot of money, you know, moving it around the globe. And their fingers are in every single meal that we eat. And of course, as we talk more and more about building local regional food systems and becoming more resilient and more sustainable and more food secure, that is completely 100% contrary to their mission.
Well, thanks. I think one reason why farmers may be hard to enslave is that when you're doing that kind of very hands-on work and interacting with nature and a natural process, then you have to have a sense of science. There are principles. There are laws of the universe, which if you violate them, it doesn't work. So when people come along and try and make up things that are totally arbitrary, people who have been in this kind of relationship with nature will easily reject it. Whereas people who are refrained from doing anything scientific will, you know, they can easily be fooled. You can tell people the craziest things. Gravity doesn't exist, you know, or whatever it is. And they don't know better. You can just order on Amazon. Don't worry if the trucks don't have diesel or there's no farmers left. Just place the order on your computer and the thing will automatically, magically show up on your doorstep within 24 hours. Someone who lives that way, I think, is easy to fool, easy to manipulate.
Well, and I think it's also true, not just with farmers, but independent business people that are being forced out. COVID raised their rents, you know, and they can't even own their business anymore. So they have no equity as things have increased, and they have no cushion when times get tough. The rent collectors, the big money is taken over. I mean, we're even telling people that they shouldn't be, you know, own a home anymore. You should be happy paying rent as private equity takes over our real estate markets. But as a result, you just end up with less effective citizenry, less able to support a democracy that actually works.
Exactly. Bob, you're going to go ahead.
Well, yeah, and getting back to what Mike said about the power, and I think you can't underestimate the authority that a farmer has in terms of his place in society. And I think that's a very important thing for farmers all over the world to internalize. And I really I see that all over where farmers step forward. And when I was in Europe, I mean, it was amazing. I mean, the farmers came out in different periods, shut down the entire city of Paris. In Germany, they had big outpourings. In the Netherlands, I mean, one time there were so many farmers, they shut down the entire highway system of the nation, went into gridlock. But what does that mean? Well, they're not just trying to put it into gridlock. they're standing up and they're defending the law and the right of people to eat, which is part of a natural law. It's part of what we have an inclination to do. And in particular, in the occupation of farming, when you watch and can understand all the different sciences that the farmer must train himself in terms of plant production, animal husbandry, meteorology, the science and mechanics of fixing machinery and building buildings, and then marketing and working to get their products to the households. That is a powerful dynamic that is important for a community. Now, we fought a revolution to get out of the policy that is taking over the world, which is monopolies. I mean, the British Empire was about 600 monopolies. And so when you go back and think about it, the history books show what was the first, what's considered a global monopoly. It was the Dutch East India Company. And the Dutch farmers and citizens fought a big revolutionary period to establish a nation state for the farmers. And but just as an anecdote, when I was walking into the big farm rally in The Hague on March 11th, there was two gentlemen that were walking beside me, both carrying flags. And they were smaller farmers, but they were very interesting. So we had no more than introduced each other, because I said hi. They said, "Where are you from?" I said, "I'm from the U.S." And they say, "Wow, gosh, you got the Federal Reserve. You don't have to worry about a thing." And I said, "Well, yeah, that's what a lot of people think, but it doesn't seem to be working." And he said, "Well, you know, our queen supposedly owns 18% of the Federal Reserve." And he said, she actually owns more than the Queen of England, who owned about 13%. And I thought that is one interesting discussion for a guy from the U.S. coming into a farm rally in the Netherlands. And the first thing we're talking about is the Federal Reserve and money. But it also showed me they knew a lot more about what is running things behind the scenes. So I bring that up because if you go back to think about what is it we're up against, we're up against an old entrenched system. And I'll use the Dutch East India Company since they're known. You can look it up as first global monopoly. But they were given the authority to go out and run islands and countries and set up whoever's the king or the queen or the government and take it down if they didn't play ball with them. And that is exactly what we got going on with international financial systems today. And what we're seeing is the one we're entrenched in with Britain and in Amsterdam, etc., is that network is bankrupt. And we've seen it now just, in this last week with trying to get refinanced for another 2 years. There's no way you can hold it together when you've got so much debt that you've got. So the debt is not the economy. The debt is not the nation. The debt is an instrument of control that we fought a revolution to get out of, and we need to go back into a process that's going to lift up the producers in all the various ways, the farm producers, the food producers, but all the people that participate in that and much more, healthcare, education. This is human stuff. This is not making money. And when we have a nation that's focused on making money rather than building a beautiful infrastructure and a nation that's going to lift up the minds of the next generations and take care of people in a proper human way, that is what we fought a revolution to get away from. So I really appreciate, what, Mike has been in the battle with and what Saeed has said, because, man, to see the thousands of tractors, I mean, there was times they had 8-lane highways covered bumper to bumper with tractors as far as you could see. And that moved the people. And like she said, they had no idea. And then when they would go, the people would just come out and line up the streets and support it. And now they're the number one political party in the Netherlands. And I think the world can take lessons from that in terms of taking on the international financial structures that are destroying destroying humanity and putting us into war at the same time.
You know, Bob, I think we can really take some instruction from that leadership of the Netherlands, but also out of India, where there's a lot of independent farmers and a lot of women involved in agriculture. And you think about the United States, we don't have enough farmers left to have a protest. And the farmers that are out there driving those, you know, tractors and spray rigs and whatever, they're working for Bill Gates. They're working for other, you know, private equity or financial type interests that are buying up all this land as a place to really park that money. They've got too much money, and they've got it, so they park it in the land. And so the people that are out there doing that farming on it oftentimes aren't the landowner. And so they don't have a vested interest in stewardship of the land and soil health. And they certainly aren't going to want to run any livestock because that requires extra work. And livestock are a key component in addressing climate change, more ruminants on the land, improving the soil and managed grazing and all of that. And so I just think, you know, we've got to build separate food systems that are outside of the power you just described so well. And we've just got to hook up with these citizens that live in the cities and consumers that are willing to be informed. And we've got to create some different kinds of markets that we have a fair access to, you know, and you know, we've lost so much of our share of the consumer food dollar as farmers. There's no way you can run these operations anymore without a whole lot of government subsidies. And that's just another way to control you. And so I think we can really take some lessons here from the Dutch and from the Indian government or the Indian citizenry, that, you know, because we can't fight this fight in the United States. Too many farmers are already gone. And so I think it's really important for us to hook up with consumers and who doesn't eat. They don't realize, I don't think, that their food system is under such great threat. And isn't it so disappointing that after COVID, we didn't learn the lesson? After all those empty shelves in these grocery stores, you would have thought that memory would have lasted longer.
Right. You know, you just said something very important that made me think of a fight we had when they were shutting down all the auto manufacturing in the United States. And LaRouche had said, because they were selling the top state-of-the-art equipment, laser, this and that, machine tools for pennies on the dollar to nations that were just beginning to build up that industry, whether it was Bangladesh or some other place. So we were selling off all of this incredible equipment. And LaRouche said, look, we should be retooling these plants. A machinist, a machine tool maker can, as we saw from what FDR did to prepare for World War II, the auto industry ended up producing tanks and airplanes and all kinds of other things. And what happened is the auto workers basically got scared and became small, and they took buyouts. Mm-hmm. They weren't prepared to fight. They said, I'm going to try and get, you know, they would get however many years worth of pay or some closeout salary and a pension. They said, that's it. I'm getting out of this. I'm not going to fight. And in a sense, they sold not only their own soul, but the nation. And very good people found themselves doing this. But I think part of it is this question. Bob was talking about money. You just brought up these people don't own their land. They're working for Bill Gates. They're owned. People, in a sense, have sold out they think, and I think this also comes from pessimism and fear, because people say, well, we can't change the system. It's hopeless. So I just have to try and survive. I just have to somehow get by. And of course, that is what happened in Nazi Germany, I hate to say, but people said, oh, we hate Adolf Hitler, but we'll get him out at the next election. I'll just wait till I can vote. I don't really want to stick my neck out. I might get in trouble. And you see a real crackdown now on freedom of speech, freedom of association. Whistleblowers can be almost certain that they're going to spend time in prison or flee the country. You know, it's a challenge. I think what people have to get is sort of, this is the end of the line. If we don't take a stand now, it's either nuclear war, no more food, no more energy. There's not something else that we can give up. So either we place our flag and we stand up and fight back, or unimaginable consequences. And I only hope that the movement, inspired by LaRouche's work over the years, where you have billions of people in China, Brazil, South Africa, India, who are standing up against the system, who are developing, who've built thousands of miles of high-speed rail and irrigation. And will that be enough to save the planet without the United States shaping up? I don't know. I think that's unlikely, frankly. So somehow we have to get this shift here. We've got to get Americans, and I think your idea of the food producers and the consumers, it'd be hard to find somebody who doesn't need to eat.
That's right. Yeah, and Diane, I think we have to be really, really clear what we're up against, and it's concentrated power and wealth. There's never been a greater threat to a free society than concentrated power and wealth in the hands of a few. And that's what we've got to be willing to stand up against. And boy, you described it very well, the psychology that we go through and to accept our place. I mean, think about a farmer giving up his great-great-grandfather's farm just to get some relief. And of course, his land is appreciated in value, so he might even get out of it whole. But wow, well, look what our country, look what society has lost. The wisdom and the knowledge and the willingness to work, and you know, the incubator for awesome young kids to go out into the world and make it better as well. It's a huge loss, but these farmers can only take so much. I mean, their suicide rate is 3.5 times the general public. And of course, so many of them go away so quietly. You know, they just internalize the pain and then they're gone. And it's just so cruel to allow this to occur. And, you know, but we've been all siloed around, we've been lied to, concentrated wealth owns everything, you know. So yeah, we've got to build communities again. We got to go home and make our own place as good as we can make it.
That's right. And that brings up the idea of reaching out to find the discussion processes to put back into the communities, like the cultural discussion, the great leaders, the types of music and things that people don't even think that this rich crowd oligarchy, old-time families use to keep people from thinking and from being recognizing their authority to be leaders as human beings should be, to love their neighbor, that kind of thing in that environment. And this process, and I find that this is what we have is the conditioning process of the media, the military-industrial complex, the types of control mechanisms through academia and education processes, where people are not discussing or allowed to discuss the great ideas that our founding fathers had And the farmers, early farmers of the U.S. were known as the Latin farmers because they were so well educated culturally, with the basic things. And but that was also conducive because they had an economic system where they was actually making a living and working with their neighbors. So this was the whole idea of the great economic advisor to Lincoln, Henry Carey. He wrote a whole book called The Harmony of Interests, where he talked about the idea of the proper system under the American system was to bring the producer and the consumer closer and closer and closer together so they can socially interact, go to the same community things, churches, whatever it is, but it increases the morality of the society to know the guy you're looking at straight in the eye is going to buy something from you or you're going to make something for him. But the idea of the old empire system was to always move the producer and the consumer farther and farther and farther apart. So we ship things from halfway around the world and pay people peanuts to make it and then sell it very high halfway across the world through a monopoly process now, like Walmart's and Costco's and all this stuff. But the point is, the people keep working harder and harder, and they don't have time and an environment to develop their cognitive powers and appreciate the cultural development that made humanity what it is today. And that's what we see all the war and all this thing where you just keep building up debt and debt and debt and don't build nothing real. And then people end up, they don't have a life, they don't have a family, and the whole country then sits back and we go to war after war after war after war.
Yeah, Bob, when you describe that, I think about how many fewer homeless people we would have if we had communities that supported the people in them. And I also think about, you remind me of Abraham or of Benjamin Franklin's trip to Scotland and Ireland prior to us declaring our independence from the crown. And he came home fully convinced that we had to declare independence because there's no way we want to end up like those people that were subjects to the crown and working for the lords, the land lords. And these tenant farmers were starving on land. They were producing livestock that they were not allowed to eat. The potato famine was bad in Ireland and in Scotland, but 25 miles away in England, there wasn't any problem at all. People were doing just fine. And so honestly, what's happened is we've transitioned from citizens to subjects. We went from subjects to citizens thanks to our Declaration of Independence, and now we're back as subjects again to this same concentrated power. But I see in the Dutch and the Europeans remembering the Irish and the Scottish and the abuse that they suffered. And, they've been so strong in their family farm and support of those family farms. And now we're seeing this massive attack on them and it's the weirdest reasons in the world, but it's really about getting rid of people who don't hitch to the plow, to the corporate power and wealth.
I want to say is, look, this is why we really have to put Wall Street through bankruptcy. And LaRouche said this over and over, that you should bury them so deeply you can't smell the stench. You think about, take Jeffrey Epstein, that great moral leader. And Jeffrey Diamond, of JP Morgan Chase, had a lot of dealings with him, business and other kinds of business, I'm sure. Well, what is JP Morgan Chase doing? It's getting discounted rates to swallow up every bank in the country that's going under. And I think this is something that can really unify people, which is why Teresa Heinz Kerry funded that Occupy Wall Street movement, however many years ago, a decade ago or so, because they wanted to make sure that people really wouldn't get the idea that we should shut this down. And we have an advantage now, which is that the way they've been printing money, the thing is going to come down. The question is how, and the question is what replaces it. And also, if we can get ourselves together to not cower in fear and beg for crumbs, but to say, okay, this whole damn thing is totally bankrupt. We need a new system. We need to go back to the Constitution, no Federal Reserve. We need a national bank under our elected government. I was just reading something by Mr. LaRouche on education. I think he would definitely support getting rid of some of these big agencies like the NEA, because he said schools, you had things run by the states and local governments. Do you think parents want their children to grow up to be morons? No. So give them more involvement. Now, we have a problem, I think, because so many generations have been so dumbed down. I'm not sure that the parents today would have an idea of a classical curriculum, but they certainly would get rid of some of the most destructive stuff that's going on in the schools right now. But it is this Wall Street operation. It's no longer a government. And one thing that kind of goes against the grain, because people think, oh, it's government overreach. George Washington, in his farewell address, and I really think this is very Hamiltonian and probably came from Hamilton, made a big point. We need a powerful government. Why? To protect people's freedom. That is, our government has been taken over by financial interests. The government is not using its power. It's not busting up monopolies. It's not protecting small businesses. It's not protecting family farmers. It's lying there, taking in money. One person said to me, and I was a little taken aback because people complain about all the perks of people in the Congress. The salary of a congressman hasn't changed in about 20 years. It's $174,000, which isn't that much. One person said to me, well, we should give all the congressmen a raise because people who are really talented who want to make money won't go into Congress because they can make more money elsewhere. Now, I don't think it's about money, but it does. How do they make their money? They have all these insider trading deals and lobbyist things and the most unbelievable corruption. So they're all owned exactly by these corporations who should be put under bankruptcy reorganization. And I think we can't escape it. And unfortunately, because we don't teach American history anymore, Americans don't know what the legitimate powers of our government are, which we are not exercising. And instead that we have allowed this corrupt class of, I don't know what, blood-sucking insects to take over the functions of government and to literally eat the heart out of our productive capability. And this has to stop.
Nicholas Shaxson wrote a book on financialization. He's from the UK. And boy, I'd have to look it up, but I've read it. And this whole idea of financialization of industries. Example, we've got some new gas station convenience store chains that came to Colorado Springs, Come and Go and Maverick, and it's a build sell buyback kind of an operation. So a company comes in, they build these gas stations, they sell it to private equity or investors, and then pay rent, and they operate the thing. Then you've got your. And now I understand that Maverick and Come and Go are now together and have merged. So, there's no competition. But then you've got this little gas station over on Circle in the east part of Colorado Springs that's independent. Their windows have been blown out by vandals. They've got some plywood in the windows, but their gas is 50 cents a gallon cheaper. And all I'm saying is that's the measure of financialization. The guys that have the money control over these industries are going to get theirs at the expense of anyone who puts gas in a gas tank. And so you've got this little old gas station owned by an independent person that's giving gas, that's selling gas at a profit. You know, they're throwing rocks through his windows like they do Ranch Foods Direct. We had a bunch of windows, you know, big rocks thrown through, and then a Mercedes comes by and picks the guy up, and the cops do nothing. But yeah, it's that whole layer of financialization that we absolutely have to get rid of. And I've said for years, Wall Street needs to be pushed off into the ocean, and it needs to disappear from these stupid news channels, because Wall Street is not Main Street. Wall Street is not the economy. It's what the better Wall Street does, the worse Main Street does, and it's inversely related to a healthy economy.
Right, exactly. We should wrap up. Bob, do you have anything else you want to say? I have one last thing I want to.
Yeah, I think I'll just say this, because I just got a text during this program from a young farmer I've been talking to for a long time. And he said this, I'm going to read this to you. It says, Bob, it has been a wild ride and a fun fight the last 12 years of really working with and beside you. Trust me when I tell you that I wouldn't have started stirring the pot politically if you wouldn't have educated me on how this godforsaken system operates. We are going to win this fight. They may look like they got us surrounded and outnumbered, but we're going to win.
That's a good way to end, Bob.
Thank you. And along those lines, I'll just say anyone who's listening tonight from the New York area, please see my website. I'm having a town hall meeting tomorrow at 10 a.m. in Queens, where we will be assembling the movement that is going to win this fight. And then I particularly want to encourage everybody, next Saturday, a week from tomorrow, June 10th, is the 60th anniversary of the speech that President Kennedy gave at American University. And Helga Zepp-LaRouche has issued an urgent appeal by citizens and institutions from all over the world to the next president of the United States, in effect challenging the presidency. Can we have a president that would be capable of giving such a speech where 5 months after the Cuban Missiles Crisis, President Kennedy was talking about peace? And how do you organize peace? And what is it based on? And that perhaps Americans should put themselves in the mind of the Soviets, who lost, he said, over 20 million, 27 million people in World War II, and consider, he said, I may find communism repugnant, but you can't take this away from them. And obviously, and of course, they're not communists now, there is a way to work together. They've made great contributions in science. They made great contributions fighting Hitler. Why should we be at war? So she is raising the question, cannot we have a standard of leadership in this nation that would be like this leadership? That was the president. That was someone worthy of institution of the presidency. And I think the only way we're going to get that is for Americans to demand that and to stop settling. You'd think out of 330 million people, we could come up with a better crop of candidates than we typically have for every office. So I would encourage people to go and add your name to the appeal on the Schiller Institute website, and to plan. That conference is on Zoom. It starts at 10 a.m. on Saturday, June 10th, and hopefully will be a springboard for winning the fight, as Bob's friend says we are going to do. And I think we're all committed to that. So let's make sure we do. And thank you both for being here.
Thanks for the opportunity, Diane. Good to see you, Bob.
Yes, good seeing you, Mike. Good discussion.